The lawyer placed the last document on the table. My stepbrother was already smirking, counting his millions in his head. My mother's entire estate, the house I grew up in, the business my real father built, the savings accounts I'd watched her carefully manage, all going to him. But then the lawyer cleared his throat. "There's one more envelope." My stepbrother's smile faltered, just for a second, but I saw it, and in that moment, I knew. My mother hadn't forgotten me after all. What was in that envelope? Stick around, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why my stepbrother hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. And why I sleep very, very well at night. But first, let me take you back to where this whole mess started. Because to understand the revenge, you need to understand the betrayal. My name is Sarah, and until I was 16, I had a pretty normal life. Dad, Mom, me, our golden retriever Max, and a 3-bedroom house in a decent suburb. My dad ran a small but successful landscaping company. Nothing flashy, but we never struggled. Then Dad died. Heart attack at 42. No warning. Just gone. I watched my mom crumble. She'd loved him since high school. They were that couple, you know? The ones who still held hands in parking lots. The ones who had inside jokes from 20 years ago. For 2 years, it was just us. Mom, me, and Max. We figured it out. We went to grief counseling together. We kept Dad's business running with a manager. We survived. Then she met Richard at a grief support group. Now, I want to be fair here. Richard seemed nice at first. Widower, lost his wife to cancer, had a son named Brandon who was my age. Mom seemed happier. I wanted her to be happy. I really did. They dated for a year before getting engaged. I was 18 by then, heading to college. Mom asked me how I felt about it. I said, if he makes you happy, I'm happy. I meant it. Or at least, I thought I did. Before I tell you about Brandon, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had a stepfamily situation? Did it work out? Because what happened next? Let's just say it was a masterclass in how not to blend a family. Hit that like button if you're already sensing where this is going. The wedding was small, tasteful. Mom wore cream instead of white. Richard cried during his vows, which I appreciated. He seemed genuine. Brandon? Brandon showed up late, reeking of weed, and spent the reception on his phone. Red flag number 1. I was away at college most of the time, so I didn't see the early warning signs. But during winter break of my sophomore year, I came home and something was off. Brandon had moved into my childhood bedroom. Not the guest room, my room. My mom explained that his room at Richard's old house had been bigger, so it was only fair he got the bigger room in our house. My stuff? Boxed up in the garage. It's just temporary, Mom said. You're away at school anyway. Red flag number 2. Brandon had dropped out of community college. Richard said he was finding himself. What he was actually finding was my mom's credit card. New gaming setup, designer clothes, a used BMW for his 20th birthday. I was driving a 10-year-old Honda my dad had bought me and working 2 part-time jobs to cover what my scholarships didn't. But here's the thing. I didn't complain. Mom seemed happy. Richard was attentive to her. He'd taken over managing Dad's landscaping business and actually grew it. Revenue was up 30%. I told myself the Brandon stuff was normal stepfamily growing pains. That I was being petty. That I needed to be mature about this. Looking back, I should have said something. But I loved my mom, and she loved Richard, and I didn't want to be the problem. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until years later, was that Richard was already laying the groundwork for what came next. Every time I visited, every time I kept quiet about Brandon's freeloading, I was unknowingly playing right into their hands. Keep watching, because the manipulation gets so much worse. I graduated college with honors. Dual degree in marketing and business administration. Landed a good job at a tech company in Seattle. Finally felt like I was honoring Dad's memory by building something. Mom came to my graduation. Richard came. Brandon didn't. Mom, he had a job interview. Narrator, he did not have a job interview. Over the next 3 years, I visited home every few months. Each time, I noticed changes. Small things at first. Dad's landscaping company had been renamed Mitchell & Sons Landscaping. Richard's last name was Mitchell. Brandon was apparently the & Sons, even though he'd never worked a day there. Dad's name? Erased. The photos of Dad that used to line the hallway? Replaced with wedding photos of Mom and Richard. My baby pictures? Gone. We ran out of room on the walls, Mom said. I brought it up once. Mom, it feels like Dad's being erased. She got defensive. Your father is gone, Sarah. I'm allowed to move on. Why are you being so selfish? That word, selfish. She'd never called me that before. Richard, always the peacemaker, put his hand on her shoulder. She's grieving in her own way, honey. Let's give her space. But his eyes when he looked at me? Cold, calculating. I started visiting less. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum where my childhood had been quietly dismantled and replaced with someone else's family. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own childhood home, drop a heartbreak emoji in the comments. And subscribe, because what happens next is going to make your blood boil. The call came on a Tuesday. Mom had stage 3 ovarian cancer. Aggressive. The doctors were optimistic but realistic. I took a leave of absence from work and moved home. Not to my room. Brandon still had that. I slept on the couch. For 6 months, I was there. Every chemo appointment, every doctor's visit, every night she was too sick to sleep and needed someone to talk to. Brandon? He showed up twice, both times to ask Mom for money. Richard was around, but he spent most of his time managing the business. Someone has to keep things running, he'd say. Medical bills don't pay themselves. Fair point, but I was doing all the actual caregiving. During one of Mom's lucid moments between chemo sessions, she grabbed my hand. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For losing myself. For making you feel like you weren't important. Your father would be ashamed of me. I started crying. Mom, no. Let me finish. She squeezed my hand. I've made mistakes. But I'm going to fix things. I promise. 2 weeks later, she went into remission. The cancer was gone. We'd won. I moved back to Seattle, back to my job, believing that we'd turned a corner. That Mom had seen the light. That things would be different. I was so naive, because while I was celebrating her remission, Richard was making his own plans. Plans that had been in motion for years. Plans that would completely blindside me at the worst possible moment. Stay with me. The will reading is coming up in just a few minutes. Mom stayed in remission for 3 years. 3 good years. We talked on the phone every week. I visited every couple of months. Things felt better. Not perfect, but better. She'd even started talking about her legacy, about making sure everyone was taken care of. I assumed she meant fairly. Equally. The cancer came back with a vengeance. Stage 4. Everywhere. The doctors gave her 6 months. She lasted 4. I was there when she died. Holding her hand. Richard was on the other side of the bed. Brandon was, predictably, not in the room. He was in the waiting room playing on his phone. Her last words to me, the lawyer has everything. Trust the process. At the time, I thought she meant the funeral arrangements.
The funeral was packed. Dad's old employees showed up. Mom's friends from church. People whose lives she'd touched. Brandon wore a hoodie. Richard gave a beautiful eulogy about the love of his life and their blended family. I spoke about the Mom I'd known before Richard. About Dad. About our life before it all got complicated. Richard's jaw tightened during my speech. I noticed. The lawyer called us in 1 week after the funeral. For the reading of the will. Me, Richard, and Brandon sat in a conference room that smelled like leather and old money. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia, had known my parents for 20 years. She looked uncomfortable. Let's begin, she said. Okay, this is it. This is the moment where everything changes. Before I tell you what was in that will, hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see how this ends. Trust me. Patricia opened the folder. Cleared her throat. To my beloved husband Richard Mitchell, I leave the house we shared, along with all furnishings and personal effects. Richard nodded. Expected. To Brandon Mitchell, my stepson, I leave Mitchell & Sons Landscaping Company, including all assets, equipment, contracts, and goodwill. Brandon sat up straighter. Tried to suppress a smile. Additionally, to Brandon Mitchell, I leave the sum of $400,000 from my investment accounts. $400,000. The business my dad built. Given to a kid who'd never worked a day in his life. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. And to my daughter, Sarah. Here it comes, I thought. The pity prize. Maybe $50,000. Maybe some jewelry. I leave the sum of $10,000 and my personal jewelry collection. $10,000. Brandon couldn't contain himself anymore. He was grinning openly now. Richard put a hand on his shoulder. Squeezed. Your mother loved you, he said to his son. Didn't even look at me. I was too shocked to cry. Too angry to speak. My mother, the woman I'd cared for through cancer, twice, had essentially written me out of her life. Patricia looked miserable. That concludes the will. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I stood up. Started to leave. Wait, Patricia said. I turned. There's one more envelope. Retention hook 1900 hours, and this is where everything you thought you knew about this story flips upside down. Do not click away. The next 5 minutes will be worth it. Patricia pulled out a sealed envelope from a separate folder. My name was written on it in my mother's handwriting. Your mother gave this to me 3 weeks before she died. With very specific instructions. I was to give it to you privately, after the will reading, but... She glanced at Richard and Brandon. She also said I could use my discretion. And I think you should open it now. In front of everyone. That's highly irregular, Richard said sharply. So was your wife's insistence on this particular provision, Patricia shot back. Open it, Sarah. My hands were shaking. I tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter. And a key. I started reading aloud. My dearest Sarah. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've just sat through the most painful experience of your life. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I need you to trust me one more time. The will you just heard was not my real will. It's a fake. Legally binding, but strategically temporary. 3 years ago, when I went into remission, I hired a private investigator. I needed to know if my instincts about Richard were correct. If I was being paranoid, or if my cancer brain was making me see things that weren't there. I wasn't paranoid. Richard married me for Dad's business and my life insurance. He's been systematically cutting you out of my life since the wedding. Deleting photos. Minimizing your presence. Making me feel guilty for loving my own daughter. The PI found evidence that Richard had done this before.
His first wife? She changed her will 2 months before she died of cancer, leaving everything to Richard and Brandon. Her daughter from her first marriage got nothing. She tried to contest it and lost. He's a professional. He preys on widows and sick women. And I almost let him do it to you. So here's what I did. The will Patricia just read is real. Richard gets the house. Brandon gets the business and the $400,000. You get $10,000. But here's what they don't know. 2 years ago, I sold Dad's business. Quietly. To a private equity firm for $2.8 million. Richard thinks he's been running it this whole time, but he's actually been managing it for the new owners. They've been paying him a salary as CEO. When I die, his employment contract terminates, and he'll be fired within 30 days. The business Brandon just inherited? It's a shell. The name, a few trucks, some equipment. Worth maybe $100,000 if he's lucky. The actual valuable parts, the contracts, the client relationships, the real assets, I sold them 2 years ago. The $400,000 Brandon is getting? That's from a separate account I set up specifically for this purpose. That money will run out fast. I've watched him spend. He'll blow through it in 2 years. The house? It has a reverse mortgage I took out last year. Richard will discover that he owes more on it than it's worth. He can keep it, but he'll be paying for it out of pocket. As for you, my darling girl, the $2.8 million from the sale of the business is in a trust. You're the sole beneficiary. You'll receive $50,000 immediately, then monthly distributions of $10,000 for life. The principal is protected and will pass to your children someday. Additionally, your father had a life insurance policy I never told anyone about. $500,000. I've been letting it mature. You're the beneficiary. That money is waiting for you. The key in this envelope is to a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside, you'll find all the documentation, the business sale paperwork, the trust documents, the life insurance policy, and a full report from the private investigator about Richard's history. You'll also find something else, letters from me. One for every birthday until you turn 50. I won't be there to see you grow older, but I wanted you to know that I'm thinking of you. Always. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I needed Richard to think he'd won. I needed him to get comfortable, to stop hiding his tracks. The pie needed time to build the case. By the time you read this, you'll be angry at me. You'll think I betrayed you. But please, understand, this was the only way to protect you and honor your father's memory. Richard took 7 years from us. But he doesn't get to take your future. I love you, Sarah. I always did. I just needed to be smart about showing it. The lawyer has everything. Trust the process. All my love, Mom. P.S. Brandon is not Richard's biological son. The pie discovered Richard adopted him from his first wife's previous relationship. He uses the boy as part of his con. The struggling single dad act works on lonely widows. Brandon knows. He's complicit. They've done this before, and they would have done it again if I hadn't stopped them. I finished reading. The conference room was silent. Richard's face had gone from smug to pale to red. Brandon looked confused. He clearly hadn't been let in on the full plan this time. That's insane, Richard finally said. She was on heavy pain medication at the end. This is clearly the ramblings of. Everything in that letter is legally documented and verified, Patricia interrupted. I have copies of all the documents she mentioned. The business sale went through 2 years ago and is a matter of public record. The trust is ironclad. The life insurance policy is active and paid in full. She turned to Richard. And the reverse mortgage on the house? That's real too. You owe $340,000 on a house worth $380,000. Congratulations on your inheritance. Richard stood up abruptly. This is fraud. We'll sue. We'll contest. On what grounds? Patricia was calm. Your wife was of sound mind when she made these arrangements. I have medical documentation of her mental competency. She was evaluated by 2 independent physicians specifically for this purpose. You have no case. She slid a thick folder across the table to me. Everything you need is in here, Sarah. Including the contact information for the private investigator, should you need to provide his findings to anyone. That last part was pointed. A threat, thinly veiled. Richard understood. If he contested, the full pie report would become public record. His con would be exposed. He'd potentially face fraud charges for his previous marriage. He grabbed Brandon's arm. We're leaving. But Dad, I thought. Shut up and come on. They left. I sat there, staring at the letter, still not quite believing it. She was something else, your mother, Patricia said softly. She came in 2 years ago, clear-eyed and determined. Told me everything. Said she'd made a mistake letting that man into her life, but she'd be damned if she let him profit from it. Why didn't she just divorce him? She thought about it, but the cancer came back. And she said. Patricia smiled sadly. She said she wanted him to think he'd won. She wanted him to feel the same betrayal you were about to feel. She wanted him to experience exactly what he'd put his first wife's daughter through. Revenge. My mom had orchestrated revenge from beyond the grave. The trust kicked in immediately. $50,000 hit my account within a week. Then $10,000 every month, like clockwork. I paid off my student loans. I quit my stressful tech job and started a consulting business doing what I actually loved. I moved to Portland and bought a small house with a yard for a dog. I got a golden retriever and named him Max, after our old dog. The life insurance money? I invested most of it. Set up a scholarship fund in my dad's name for kids who want to study business or horticulture. He would have liked that. I went to the safety deposit box. Found everything Mom had promised, plus the letters. I've only opened 5 so far. I'm 28 now. I'm saving them. 1 per birthday, like she wanted. The first one said, "You're 23 now. I hope you're finding your way. Remember, the best revenge is living well." Don't waste energy hating Richard. Just outlive him and be happy. That's what will kill him. She was right. As for Richard and Brandon, the business folded within 6 months. Turns out Brandon had no idea how to run a company, and the new owners fired Richard exactly 30 days after Mom died, just like she'd predicted. They burned through the $400,000 in 18 months. New cars, bad investments, Brandon's gambling problem that Richard had been hiding. The house went into foreclosure. Richard tried to rent it out to cover the mortgage, but it wasn't enough. Last I heard, Richard was working as a sales manager at a car dealership. Brandon's back to living with him in a 2-bedroom apartment. They tried to reach out once. Richard sent an email. I know we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we could talk. Your mother would have wanted. I blocked him. My mother would have wanted exactly what she orchestrated, for me to be free of them, financially secure, and living the life she and Dad would have dreamed for me. Here's what I learned from all this. My mom wasn't perfect. She made mistakes. She let a con artist into our lives. She allowed my father's memory to be diminished. She made me feel abandoned during the worst time of my life. But in the end, when it mattered most, she protected me. She planned. She strategized. She turned her biggest mistake into the most elaborate takedown I've ever witnessed. She taught me that revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be immediate. Sometimes the best revenge is patience, documentation, and a really good lawyer. She also taught me that love can look like betrayal from the outside. That sometimes the people who hurt us are actually saving us. I miss her every day. But I'm not angry anymore. I understand why she did it the way she did. And honestly, knowing that Richard spent 7 years thinking he'd won, only to lose everything in a single envelope? That brings me more joy than I should probably admit. So that's my story. My mom wrote me out of the will for my stepbrother, and then she rewrote the entire ending from beyond the grave. Would you have forgiven her? Or would the betrayal have been too much? Let me know in the comments. And if you know someone dealing with a manipulative stepparent or a blended family nightmare, share this video with them. Sometimes people need to know that justice is possible. Hit that like button if you think my mom was a stone-cold genius, and subscribe because I promise you, every story on this channel ends with the bad guy getting what they deserve. See you in the next one. And remember, patience is a weapon.